Well, today, guys, we're going to begin a new series that I've entitled The Pursuit of Happiness. And here's the real impact, the punch behind it. The impact of a Christian worldview upon a nation. Because what is it that shapes your view about the issues regarding what we face as a nation? How is it that you look at those events? To what forms your opinion about the things that we deal with as a nation? You see, many of us, if we would look back into it, how do we view the situations? What shaped our views? We'd look back and say, well, maybe our parents shaped our views. Maybe our relatives, maybe friends, maybe coworkers, maybe associates in business have had a dealing with shaping our view, how we look at the issues that we deal with. Some of us, it may have been shaped because of media. And whether it's television or talk radio, whether it's the Diane Sawyers, the Chris Matthews, the Rush Limbaughs, or the Sean Hannitys that shape our view about it. But what I really want us to understand that as people of God, more importantly than all, we should ask the question first and foremost is this: what does God say? What does the Bible say about the issues that we deal with? And so my question to all of us is this morning: is our worldview shaped by the Scriptures? Is it shaped by what God says about the topic? Or is it a culmination of what others' opinions and thoughts are about the matter? As we go through this series, we're going to be dealing with all the major issues that we face as a nation. And we're going to look at them purely from a Christian point of view, purely in what does the Word say about them. And so I kind of warn you in advance, I may rock your world. Because you may have thought that your opinion was wholly shaped upon the Scriptures already. But when we deal with it, it's not what I say about it. We're going to look at what does God actually say about it. And we'll find out how many of us really have a worldview that is shaped by God. And so that's where we're heading in this series. Because you and I must recognize that our founding fathers, when establishing this nation, did so because their highest aim was to create a nation of freedom, liberty, and opportunity for every single individual. And therefore, they attempted, when they were building this more perfect union, they established not an end where government would dictate down religion. In other words, what I'm saying was our founding fathers didn't have in mind a theocracy. Because those exist in our world. There are nations that have a theocracy. What you can look at is nations like Iran, nations like Saudi Arabia and other places like that. They dictate down the laws dealing with specifically how the people in the land are because religion dictates it all. But what? Our founding fathers believed in a pluralistic society. The true freedom had this as a foundation cornerstone. The freedom of religion was what would create the opportunity for freedom for all peoples, for all groups, for all cultures that would come together and form this nation. In other words, our founding fathers recognized that in a pluralistic society, people would have the opportunity to evaluate and choose and make decisions and understand what would be the basis that would best provide those opportunities. But we must recognize this end, that the principles to which this nation was established upon are clearly biblical in nature. The God of the Bible was in the background of everything that our founding fathers dreamed about and saw with respect to our nation. Why is that? Why did they have that as a foundation point? Because they understood this, that nowhere else on this planet, other than in Judeo-Christian viewpoint, was there ever the opportunity for people truly to be free and to come together with dignity and opportunity for all people. Because why? Other government opportunities oppressed the people, repressed rights, and stopped individuals from being able to get ahead. Really, generally speaking, in most of those nations, there was no middle class. There was no opportunity for people to gain the chance to work hard, to do well, and to get ahead. But that was what our founding fathers saw and understood. And you and I must not be ignorant of this. What we so value and what people talk about so much in this nation, you must recognize where they come from, because the whole idea of human rights is entirely rooted in a biblical worldview. and the understanding of the God of the Bible, the God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ. That's where all of that came from. That's where all of it was ventured. Because why? You do not find it, whether in other cultures, other ideologies. Why? Because it is only in the Judeo-Christian viewpoint that you find that women have rights, that people can get ahead, that they're not controlled or exploited for gain, that the dignity of every single human being and the inalienable rights were a gift by their Creator, and that all would have opportunity and a free land to get ahead through their efforts and work and prosper. That was what America, that's why some who intelligently try to talk today actually speak in ignorance, because human rights are not found on this planet outside the viewpoints of the God of the Bible. And so we're going to look at it in this front, because why? All the issues that face our nation, we must look in regards to what does the Bible truly say about them. My hopes is that we would become so biblical in our thinking that, listen, that we would engage the process. Why? Because listen to me, too many people in this country talk a good game. There are a lot of people who say, I'm a Christian, but their whole view is devoid of any biblical education or understanding. There are people who tout Christianity and politics, whose viewpoints about a world and about government are not in line with the Scripture whatsoever, but in line with other ideologies and other thoughts about educated people who actually are opposed to the viewpoints of the Bible. And that is why it is important, as we study through this series, that we look at it from that point of view. What does God say? How does God view it? Because here's the deal, guys. We must be engaged in the process. If God called us to be salt and light, didn't I just talk about all that? In fact, guys, that series that's available on CD, you can pick up at our information centers, the free CD. But listen to me. We must not be disengaged from the process. We must allow dialogue and communication. Why? Because we've withdrawn from it. One of the things that bothered me most about our society today is that we've lost the idea of civility. That we can't talk with opposing viewpoints other than casting each other as enemies and making fun of the opposite view. We as believers need to be engaged in the process. But here, I'm going to exhort you strong on this front, because why? The Christians have to stand up and do their civic duty before God, because in the year 2000, do you realize this? That 50% of the people who claim to be Christians in the United States of America were not even registered to vote. 50% of people who claim the name of Christ were not even registered to vote. And in the 2000 election, 50% of the registered Christians didn't even bother to cast a vote. So in other words, only 1/4 of the Christian community even participated in the 2000 election. And so guys, to give you even opportunity, we're going to be having voter registration right here in our church. Because all I'm asking, I want you this. My heartbeat is that you would not be so politically engaged, that you become partisan in your viewpoint and fail to recognize what the true biblical worldview is all about. And so in essence, my heartbeat is that we would get involved, that we would understand what God says about it and care enough to know that that's the model to bring liberty and freedom to every person. So today we're going to talk about the subject. We're going to begin the series with the subject of immigration. Hot topic today. People have all sorts of thoughts about the ideas of immigration. And it's one of those controversial areas, but let's look at it from the point of view of the Bible. In fact, starting off today, I actually want to read you this quote from the first president of the United States of America, George Washington. One of our founding fathers. Listen to what he said regarding the subject of immigration. I put this in your notes so you can read along with me, but look at this. It says, "The bosom of America is open to receive not only," I love this, "not only the opulent and respectable stranger." In other words, people who are educated, people who have money, people who have means. They're not the only ones that we welcome to these shores. But he said, "but the oppressed and persecuted of all nations and religions, whom we shall welcome to a participation of all," notice this, A-L-L, all our rights and privileges. In other words, George Washington was saying that aliens, immigrants, were welcome to all the rights and privileges of America. But he went on to say this, look at it. He said, if by decency and propriety of conduct they appear to merit the enjoyment. In other words, what he was saying, that all the rights and privileges of America are welcome to anybody who comes here as long as they embrace America as their home, meaning that they live here as an American and choose to integrate into society as an American. All the rights and privileges. And notice, he said, not the opulent, not the wealthy, not the educated alone, but the oppressed and all. You and I must recognize this end. America, whether we realize it or not, is an entire nation of immigrants. All of us in this room have something in common. That every one of us can trace back an origin, that we were all brought here. Either our grandparents, great-grandparents, or even parents may have come to these shores from some other place. The only people who can claim this as their native home is Native Americans. In other words, American Indians. I'm going to talk about immigration. Give them, they're waiting for all of us to give them back their land. No, America is a land of immigrants. They're a land of people who came here from other nations, from other parts. All of us came. And what made America great for so many years was out of these different cultures, out of all of these different conglomerates, that we truly became a melting pot. The culture of America is not distinct in one heritage or another heritage, but we left all of that to become American. And that's the unity. That's the defining reality of the strength of America. Those are things that people who are migrating to America today may have not totally understood, but we'll talk about as we go through this series, through this message today. But listen to me. I want to read you also this. This is found, the Statue of Liberty that is in New York Harbor was a gift given to us by France. And in it, they were commending America for all that this was a land that took in others of all the cultures and other nations so freely. And so listen, this poem, this is a part of the poem by Emma Lazarus that is found on the Statue of Liberty, probably familiar to many, but listen to this part that I put in your notes. It says, give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to breathe free, the wretched refuge of your teeming shore. Send these, the homeless, the tempest-tossed to me. I lift up my lamp beside the golden door. America was an open door, a golden door for all who fled persecution, oppression, poverty, to find a place where they could make a way for themselves, where they could invest in the American dream by hard work, by giving myself, by working to get ahead. I can actually make a way for me and my family and for my heritage. This is the dream and the vision of America. And you don't find that anywhere else in this world. America has distinctly this end. Has America struggled over the years? Yes. During our times, during our history, we've gone through different ideas. The very first government to be established on these shores was by the Pilgrims. And when you go back into history, what you find is America has experimented with a lot of different things over time. And she's found out what works, and that's why it's important for us to be knowledgeable about these ends. Do you know that the Christians that established the colony that the Pilgrims set up in Massachusetts actually first established a socialistic government? They thought in some way, this was the most Christian way of leading the land. And guess what they found? It was a miserable failure. It didn't work. It didn't help everybody. Because why? People who didn't work hard got the same advantage of all the people who were busting their butt to get ahead. And they said, this isn't right. And so they went back to the scripture in America as she began to embrace the ideals that actually provided opportunity. That's why William Bradford in the Massachusetts colony said, what? If you don't work, you don't eat. They recognized that the capitalistic viewpoint actually gave opportunity to everybody to get ahead. And so what? All of it was founded in this truth that as they sought the heart of God, the wisdom of the scriptures would lead and guide us to deal with the most pressing issues of our time. I think it's the same today. That if we have a Christian worldview, we can look at these situations. So let's look at the subject of immigration for a moment. Let me talk to you about some of the concerns that people have. One of the concerns, obviously, that people have when it comes to immigration is national security. And yes, on 9/11/2001, our country was attacked. People came here with dubious intent to destroy our land and our liberties and freedoms. And you and I understand that since that time, so much has changed with regards to immigration and how all this operates, or how all of this works and orients. But you and I must recognize that we still have to deal with the problems regarding immigration. One of the things that's not been an honest communication from our government is this. Yes, we need border security. Because there are people that have devious means in mind. And we need to secure our ends. So why do we debate the stupid stuff and not actually secure our borders and take care of these situations? But listen, there are other areas that people debate. There are myths and facts. What I'm going to read you, in my studies, I came across this end. And this is put out by the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. This is the business organization in America, not a left-wing leaning, crazy group. Listen to me. These deal with the concerns. So let me go through the myths and the facts regarding immigration. Number one, the myth is this. Every job filled by an immigrant, especially an illegal immigrant, is a job that could be filled by an unemployed American. That's the myth, because here's the fact. Immigrants typically do not compete for jobs with native-born workers. And immigrants create jobs as entrepreneurs, consumers, and taxpayers. In other words, here's the honest discussion that we need to have in the land, that many of the jobs that we have here in America, Americans don't want to do. And immigrants are more than glad to do those jobs. In fact, some of the skill bases that they have today and they perform are things that we've almost lost in our nation. And it's not a zero basis that if they weren't doing it, then some American would do it. Generally, they don't even compete on those ends, because why? Americans have a lot of jobs they don't feel like doing anymore. So it's not a zero basis. And you and I must recognize this, because why? It is those jobs. If all of a sudden they were to leave, listen, there are 11 million illegal immigrants. There are 33 million legal immigrants in this land and 11 million illegal immigrants. Just take the illegal immigrant side of it. If all of them were to go home tomorrow, do you know that it would cripple this economy? Do you know it would actually destroy jobs, businesses, and all the rest? That's not a real thinking individual to say that. And if you want to know the terms that we've been saying to immigrants in this land, the government keeps saying, well, we're going to work on this. We're going to come up with that. So what does that say to an illegal immigrant? Stay put. We're trying to fix this problem. Because in honesty, guys, here's the deal. They actually help us fulfill problems that are in our land. Second myth, listen. Wages. Immigrants drive down wages of American workers. That's a myth. Here's the fact. Immigrants give a slight boost to the wages of most Americans by increasing their productivity and stimulating investment. You know why? Because immigrants, the money that they make, they buy goods and services, they buy products, they do things, they increase the economic impact of the nation, which helps everybody to prosper and to get ahead. They don't take away from it, they don't decrease it. They actually increase it. Here's the third one. Listen to this. Immigrants will overpopulate the United States. That's a concern that some Americans have, but listen to me. That's a myth. Here's the fact. Immigrants will replenish the U.S. labor force by the baby boom retirees. See, we have a population problem here in America because you know why? The Anglo-Caucasian families here in America, do you know what the average child's, how many children there are per average Caucasian Anglo family in America? It's 1.5 children per family. That's what it equates down to mathematically. Do you know what that means? We would be shrinking as a society. Right in the time frame when we have nobody, listen to me guys, I listened to both ends of the spectrum during the conventions that took place in this nation. I heard what both parties had to say. I listened carefully. In fact, you know what's something I haven't really heard most people talk about? It's a problem I've been concerned about for 10 years. that I haven't heard intelligent people actually deal with, and that's this. That there is an inverted pyramid that's beginning in America right now. Because why? A lot of the social services that we have in the nation, things like Social Security, Medicare, all of those were paid for by the tax base of a far broader working class that worked in America. But during the boom of the baby boomer years, we had a huge working class to support that. But then we came into the radical 60s and the free love movement and, sexual impropriety. And then that gave birth to abortion and the disintegration of the American family. And so you know what ended up happening? Families got smaller. And we have less people in the workforce today. So here's the deal. When all the baby boom generation begin to retire, who's going to pay for all of it? If you've got nothing underneath it, without immigrants, the entire system will collapse. That's why the ignorance of people who speak about this issue without intelligence. You know why we haven't really found problems to this issue? Is because it's purely political. Do you understand what I mean by that? It's because people want immigrants to be indebted to one party or another party. And that's why, in my thoughts, you need a bipartisan commission to deal with the issue outside of the realm of politics and let people choose freely what party affiliations and not feel indebted to somebody because they're beholden to them for their immigration status. Just a thought for you on that front, but listen. Immigrants will not overpopulate because why? They help take up the difference. Do you know what? People think this. Immigrants don't pay. Did I skip that one? Immigrants don't pay taxes. Do you know what? Immigrants, guys, pay currently, listen, undocumented immigrants in America have taxes taken out of their paychecks. Many of them, they have jobs that they gave false Social Security numbers and other identification support to. And listen, this is something the U.S. government doesn't talk about too often, but they have almost $1 trillion in taxes paid that they cannot associate back to an American to whom they go for because of differential, no matching of Social Security numbers and all. Do you know what? That $1 trillion is floating a lot of what's going on here in America? Nobody talks much about that issue. Do you know that the average illegal immigrant pays, just in 2010 alone, they paid $11.2 billion in taxes in this nation? And so the idea that they don't pay taxes is a myth. Let me give you the next one, welfare. Immigrants come to the United States for welfare benefits. That's a myth. Let me give you the facts. Undocumented immigrants are not eligible for federal, public, and benefit programs. And legal immigrants face stringent eligibility restrictions. Lastly, listen to this one. Or actually, two more. One. Today's immigrants are not assimilating into the U.S. society. Here's the facts. Today's immigrants are buying homes and becoming U.S. citizens. And lastly, listen to this one. Some people have this concern. Immigrants are more likely to commit crimes than U.S. natives. Fact. Immigration does not cause crime rates to rise, and immigrants have lower incarceration rates than native-born Americans. So what I'm saying is that a lot of this is based on people's ignorance of the object, but let's look at what does God say about the matter. You know what? In preparing for this message alone today, I studied over 165 scriptures in the Bible regarding the subject of immigration. You probably didn't even realize there's that many in there. God has a lot to say about it, so I had to narrow my views down into it. So just listen to some that I selected. Because what you and I need to recognize is this. When God established the nation of Israel, the nation of Israel was to be a model to all the nations of the world. In other words, this. God said that other nations would look at Israel and say, what nation has such wise and prudent laws? And what nation has God so close to her? In other words, it would inspire them to model a lot of their laws, their legislation, and the way that they operated their social governance by the model that Israel was. In fact, no other nation was to be Israel. But the laws, the principles that created the freedoms of their society were to be the guiding ends. In fact, guys, whether you realize this or not, that's what our founding fathers recognized. That it was our jurisprudence system here in America was based entirely off the models of what God had done in the nation of Israel. And so listen, to what God said to the nation of Israel as they was forming. In Exodus 22 and verse 21, God said, "Do not mistreat or oppress a foreigner. You were foreigners in Egypt." In other words, God said, listen, guys, you know what it's like to be taken advantage of. You know what it's like to be used for the benefit of somebody else. When you form this nation, remember your experience in Egypt. And let this be an absolutely symbol to all the nations of the world, how you are to treat foreigners who are living on your soil. Because you know what it was like to be mistreated and to be oppressed. So when you form your government, do not do that to anyone else. Listen to this one. Deuteronomy 10 verse 19 says, "And you are to love those who are foreigners." Notice he didn't say just put up with them. He said you are to love those who are foreigners. For you yourselves were foreigners in Egypt. You know, in other words, what God's saying, let me pull it to the New Testament for you. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. How would you have wanted your grandfather, your aunt, your uncle, the other people that became an immigrant here on these shores, how did you want them to be treated? Then treat others in that fashion. He said to the nation of Israel consistently, your views of immigration should be set by what you experienced in a negative way in Egypt. Don't allow that to become who you are as a people. Look at this one. Leviticus 19:34 said, "The foreigner residing among you must be treated as your native born. Love them as yourself. For you were foreigners in Egypt. I am the Lord your God." In other words, he says, listen, guys, don't distinguish the difference. Treat foreigners the same way you treat native-born people. Are you kidding me? Same opportunities? According to God. Treat them the same as a native-born. Look at this. Leviticus 24, verse 22 said, "You are to have the same law for the foreigner and the native-born. I am the Lord your God." Listen, God says, no two sets of laws. Here's the deal. Every foreigner who comes here is to abide by the same laws that native-born people are. Can I give you a help on this one? That means anybody choosing to become an Israeli had to abide by everything that Israelis did. So let me make it more plain and more clear to you. To become a part of the Israeli society, if you were a man born outside of that end, you had to submit yourself to circumcision. Oh, that's a private matter. Yeah, but listen, here's the deal. You had to abide by everything. And so listen to me. If you're an immigrant into the United States of America, that means you need to embrace American culture. You need to embrace America and all of America's laws. You can't say, I am not a part of that, and therefore I don't have to do that because I'm not American. No, it's one way or the other. To embrace American culture means you embrace the entirety of American culture, which means that it's the same law for everybody. That means that if you have foreign workers that work for you, you can't pay them less wages and mistreat them in any form. You have to treat them in every way like you would treat an American. It goes both ways. God said the same law applies to everybody. It is the same. Listen to this next one. Listen to this. He said in Numbers 15:15, he says, the community is to have the same rules for you and the foreigner residing among you. This is a lasting ordinance for the generations to come. You and the foreigner shall be the same before the Lord. In other words, God said treat them the same. Don't discriminate against them because they weren't born here. Look at this next one. In Deuteronomy 26:12, it says, when you have finished setting aside 1/10 of all of your produce in the 3rd year, the year of the tithe, you shall give it to the Levite, the foreigner, the fatherless, and the widow, so that they may eat in your towns and be satisfied. Now you need to understand the way in which God established the nation of Israel. People get confused because in New Testament times, we don't go back and study the word often with regard to the nation of Israel. But there were multiple tithes. That was a form of taxation to the people that lived in Israel. There was their personal tithe, which was to them and God, that they brought to the temple to worship God with. But they also collected a tithe every 3rd year. 1/10 of everything that people made over that period of time, they were to bring to the leaders of the nation, and here's what this tax went for. It would provide for all the public servants. In other words, in the establishment of the nation of Israel, the people who were the public servants who basically did the governance and watched over the way in which the nation was the tribe of Levites. The priests were a part of that. So the Levites and the priests were public servants. And so a part of that tithe went to pay them and to take care of them. But then God lumped in, here were 4 groups, and I encourage you to do a study in Scripture, and you'll find that God always lumps these 4 together. The poor, the widow, the orphan, and the immigrant. All 4 of those were protected classes. God said that a part of the taxation was to take care of, listen to me, the poor, the widow, the orphan, and yes, the immigrant. And that's why, listen to this. In Psalms 146 and verse 9, it says, the Lord watches over the foreigner and sustains the fatherless and the widow, but he frustrates the ways of the wicked. In other words, God cares about the immigrant. And as Christians, what does that mean? That we should care about the immigrant. If you're taking notes with me, follow along with me in this end. Number 1, God identifies with the vulnerabilities of immigrants and seeks to protect them. God identifies with the vulnerabilities of the immigrants and seeks to protect them. You see, the plight of an immigrant, for someone to come into a nation that they don't speak the language, they don't understand the culture, they are absolutely in jeopardy of being exploited. And God said, don't you dare do that. You are to take care of them. You are to protect them. You are to help them to integrate into your society. Why? Because they matter to me. I want them to matter to you. You and I need to understand, why do people come to our shores? People should ask the question, why are people here? Because some people would take the viewpoint and say, well, it's just the problem, Pastor Ken, is just illegal immigrants and they all need to go home. Well, wait a minute. Number 1, 11 million people, we don't even have the ability to process that amount, and it would devastate our economy. So it's really not an educated viewpoint. But listen to me. Why do people find themselves here? You see, the plight of many immigrants coming to this nation is because either bad government, where they're repressed, there's no opportunities, there's no freedoms, their women have to wear masks, they can't even go out in society. Whether their houses can be raided by governments at a moment, their children can be taken away and put into slavery. All sorts of oppressions happen. Their countries might not even be able to protect them from the marauders or the raiders or the drug cartels, or you name it. If you were a responsible father or mother and cared about your family, what would you seek to do? You see, many who find themselves here in America are here because they're running away from exploitation, from the disadvantages of grueling poverty that is destroying every opportunity they have to take care of their families. And so they come here with the promise that maybe, just maybe, that golden door is open and we can find a way to integrate and become a part of the American dream and make a way for ourselves. You see, but one of the most exploited groups here in the United States, this is something you don't hear talk about, but when I uncovered this, it broke my heart. We know about the devastation of human trafficking across our world, but do you know who the most vulnerable of all people groups here are in the United States of America and who get trafficked out of America? Is illegal immigrants. And why is that? Because they're scared to go to the cops. They're scared to look at any form of protection. Guys, listen to me. I get it. All the people talk about the law, but listen to me. What's the number 1 law that a Christian needs to abide by? What? The law of love. So my question is, what would love do? See, immigration's become so complicated here in the United States, and it shouldn't be. We should be pressing and demanding of those who represent us in this land to deal with this and fix the problem instead of just going by and allowing ignorance to rule and us not really caring about the matter. If we have a Christian worldview, we should care about the people that God cares about. And so listen to me. The question, why are people here and how should we deal with it? It needs a compassionate response. A common sense approach to guide us, but we do need to figure this out and stop allowing it to be politicized for political gain. So listen to me. If you're taking notes, secondly, immigrants bear the same responsibilities of citizenship as the native-born citizens. In other words, if an immigrant comes to the United States of America, they bear all the same responsibilities as a native-born American means. What? Pay your taxes, serve in the military, support your nation. In other words, listen to me, guys. Can I help you? Because I'm talking about this hopefully from a Christian worldview. You understand where I'm coming from? If you're a Christian and you're an immigrant, here's what you need to understand. Coming into this nation, you need to embrace America for America. You need to understand that coming here, I need to work towards assimilating and becoming a part of the American culture. What does that mean? That means don't just congregate people that only talk your language, that represent your viewpoint, that you set up all of your restaurants and businesses and just do business among yourselves, where you talk your own language and not integrate into the society. That's why Americans have trouble. But listen to me. What we need to recognize is we bear that responsibility. America has struggled with these issues since the birth of our country. When our country was first established, Benjamin Franklin, one of the founders of our nation, was concerned because many of the German immigrants who were coming into Pennsylvania, they were coming in with total German culture, speaking German, German signs on their businesses, only dealing with Germans. And he said, this isn't right. We can't, because the only way America survives is she needs to be one nation. She needs to not be divided, not be opposed, but they need to embrace. Therefore, immigrants coming to this country need to learn to speak the language. They need to learn to embrace the culture and the ideas of how this country operates. And that's what it means to live in America. That's what the idea that we need to see is. So what? That means what? If you hablo español, you need to speak the English, okay? And here's the deal, guys, as Christians, we should be supporting and helping that as an opportunity. You see, recognizing the responsibilities of being Americans, can I help you again? Listen, if you're a Christian and you're an immigrant in this nation, what does that mean? You got to understand one of the value systems that America embraces is a spirit of excellence. You know, Americans tend to take care of their properties, take care of their cars. They only put the right number of people to drive in it that the car's made for. You know what I mean? They listen to me. What you need to understand is this. If you live in a neighborhood, if you buy a home, Americans cut their grass. I know in other countries, yeah, the goats may eat it and other things, but you live in America. Coming to America, you need to embrace American lifestyle and care about where you live. So that means don't just fly the flag of your nation out in your house. Embrace the American flag. Embrace the American culture. Am I saying forget everything about your culture? Forget everything about what you are? No. That's the beauty of who America is. We have so much diversity. It's what makes America great. But we know that bottom line, we're not here saying we live for this culture. We're here as Americans. See, if all that the fare that we could go out to eat was just American fare, oh man, I'd leave the country just to eat. Come on. The beauty of what we have is when we learn and grow from the beautiful, what the melting pot of America is all about. So yes, embrace it. But listen, if you buy a house in a neighborhood and everybody in your neighborhood has their house painted with earth tone colors, don't paint your house purple and fly the flag of your nation in it. No, get along, embrace the culture, integrate into society. Stop trying to stand out and embrace America. And that also means don't protest against this country. Don't you dare burn a flag in this nation. If you live under this soil, if you live on this land, then you need to support it with everything that is in you. See, that's the beauty of what it was. That's why, listen to me, if we embrace that more as an ideology, then we could have the common sense communication and discussion with people who migrate here. Let me give you an example. I don't mind that other religions come here because you know one of the beautiful realities about immigrants is they're coming to Christ at far greater levels than Americans are. Because Americans are too lazy and never take for granted why they have what they have. But people who have come here from other nations know what religious oppression is all about. They know what, and they look at the liberty of America, and you can actually have a communication about these ends. Then they say, wow, see, that's all I want, because you want to know who's the most discriminated against culture here in America today in our times? It's Christians. We're told to shut up, that we can't talk in this end, where we pander to Islam and other relations of the world, because why? Either we're scared of them or we don't even know what we believe anymore. But listen to me, if we embraced American culture and people coming here, then guess what? If you're Islamic, then you just can't have your own little society and don't integrate into the community that is America. You can't sit and listen to fiery preachers that denigrate this society and say that you will live under the protections and liberties of what is America. That's the common sense, open discussion that we need to have, because why? America provides religious liberty. I would love any opportunity. You see, because when I talk to Islamic people, I just simply say, hey guys, love you. You are valuable. You are created in the image and likeness of God. God loves you. And listen, we can talk this all out, but listen to me. What I've asked Islamic leaders is this: what is the conversion policy of Islam? Nobody has answered me yet. I know what it is, but no Islamic leader has ever given me the dignity to even answer me directly when I ask that question. What is the conversion policy of Islam? In other words, if you're Islamic and you convert to another religion, what is the Islamic policy on conversion? Does anybody know it here? Not something talked about a year a day. See, but if someone converts out of Christianity, becomes something else, do we, the Christians, hunt them down? This is the thing with religious liberty. People would actually be able to breathe the fresh air and make a decision for themselves. That's the beauty of America, guys. So don't think I have an axe to grind against another world religion, because you know why? If you look at other nations of the world, how do they treat their women? How do they treat their children? How do they allow their populace freedom of choice? Do they even? You see, what I'm trying to say, guys, you have to understand America for what America is. It was a pluralistic society that provided one of the foundational cornerstones that provided dignity for all human beings was freedom of religion. We need to be able to talk about it. So guess what? Every foreigner coming here needs to embrace the responsibilities of America. Thirdly, listen. Immigrants are to have the same opportunities as native-born citizens. Immigrants are to have the same opportunities as native-born citizens. What does that mean? Which means there should be no discrimination. If they're willing to come here to work hard, to get ahead, they should be given every opportunity to start a business, to work a job, to pay their taxes, and to become a part of this society. That's what God had said. That's why, you know what, guys? I was appalled. During the time, there was a debate that went on when presidential candidates were running in the Republican Party, and Governor Rick Perry from Texas turned around and said, you know what, under my administration, we allowed children of illegal-born immigrants to attend Texas schools at the rate of Texas citizens. And people had a fit about that. And he said it was the only compassionate thing to do. And people shouted that down and said, what do you know? You know what? Guys, he was right. They were living in the Texas culture. They were paying taxes, their parents. Whether they were here legal or illegal, here's the deal. You're going to create a separate class? That's not the same rule for everybody. And it's not a biblical worldview. Like I said, I know I may rock your world, but listen. Lastly, listen, I'm out of time, so let me just run through the rest of these real quickly. God's blessing on a nation involves how you treat people from other nations. One of the reasons God blessed America so much over the years is because in this issue of immigration, we allowed the freedom and opportunity. You look at all the different, immigrants built the railroads of this nation. Immigrants built bridges and tunnels. Immigrants built the roadways and so much of it. Much of who we are and what we are, we owe extensively to immigrants and their contributions into this land. That's what's made America great. It was a land of opportunity. It said, come to these shores, embrace this culture, and you can find a way and a pathway of freedom and liberty and opportunity for you and your family. And that's why God blessed this nation. And that's why we're in danger, because we've so politicized the issue that we almost stand in opposition to God and how we deal with it. So let me leave you with these two last thoughts for the Christians. The Christian citizen and the Christian immigrant. First one, Christian citizen. Listen, if you're taking notes. Christians should deal compassionately with immigrants and seek to understand their plight. In other words, why are people here? Why did they find themselves here? Because think about how huge a journey that is to leave everything familiar to you, to leave everything you knew, and to go to somewhere where you don't know anything about it. You don't speak the language, you don't understand the culture. Why would you take that journey? And may I ask you this, and too, as Christian citizens, recognize this. Has God used immigrants in the past? Wasn't Abraham an immigrant? Wasn't Joseph in the nation of Egypt an immigrant? Wasn't Daniel in Babylon an immigrant? You see, if we're not open to the contributions of immigrants, we may be shutting down God's answers to our nation. So listen, citizens should deal compassionately with immigrants and seek to understand their plight, accepting them and helping them integrate into our society. In other words, show them how to get around. Show them how to speak the language. Help them, embrace them, and help them how to get involved and become a part and assimilate into our culture. Secondly, for immigrants that are here, if you're a Christian immigrant, listen. Immigrants should respect the customs and culture of America. In other words, guys, there's a time when you begin to dress like an American, talk like an American, live like an American, because if you live in America, you're an American. And adapt as well as support and honor our welfare. In other words, you know what, guys? Immigrants should be those that fight for the liberties of America. And immigrants should be those who respect and honor what we've provided as opportunity. That's what made America great. So when you look at this from the God's point of view, listen to me, guys. Immigration is something we should both understand and be engaged in, because you know why? It really needs to be answered in our present time, and we can't put our head in the sand and ignore it or be ignorant about it. Amen?